This is Plant-Based Briefing. MAHA's Natural Foods Obsession Doesn't Account for the Way We Actually Eat, Part 2 by Jessica Scott-Reid at sentientmedia.org. And I'm Marian Erickson. This is the Plant-Based Podcast where I curate a variety of information on plant-based and vegan living, get permission, and narrate it to you here in about 10 minutes or less every weekday. And because this article would have been longer than that, I broke it into two parts. I read part one yesterday, so go back and listen to that first, and then come back here for the second half. And now let's get to today's Plant-Based Briefing. MAHA's Natural Foods Obsession Doesn't Account for the Way We Actually Eat, Part 2 by Jessica Scott-Reid at sentientmedia.org. Why there's nothing natural about modern meat. Over the last 50 years, the number of livestock farms across the Western world has been in steady decline, while the number of animals has drastically increased. This means animals farmed for food today are kept mainly in large, confined animal feeding operations, or CAFOs, or industrialized or intensive farms, a far cry from their natural habitats. Though marketing and labeling images portray animal agriculture as natural and pastoral, with red barns, rolling pastures, and happy animals, these images do not represent the reality that over 70% of the world's meat comes from factory farms, or 99% in the U.S. In these confined spaces, animals can be manipulated with light or food deprivation and are often impeded from exhibiting many natural behaviors, including the simple act of turning around. Today's farm animals are also purposely bred and genetically manipulated to possess more profitable traits, such as accelerated growth and larger size. These animals bear very little resemblance to their wild ancestors and can suffer from various ailments due to their unnatural physiology. Despite increasing promotion of grass-fed beef and regenerative grazing, including by Kennedy, the vast majority of animals farmed for food in the U.S. are not out on pastures, but are instead fed soy and corn. About a third of all corn grown in the U.S., the nation's top crop, is used for animal feed, while about 60% of all soybean meal produced in the U.S. goes to feeding animals. On a global scale, nearly 80% of the world's soybeans go to animals farmed for food. Grass-fed beef only makes up about 4% of the value of the entire U.S. beef industry. Even then, grass-fed can include cattle who were fed grass, including farmed and harvested grasses, for only a portion of their lives. Industrial animal farming also relies heavily on antibiotics, contributing to rising antimicrobial resistance in humans, and hormones in order to keep up with consumer demand for meat, dairy, and eggs. According to Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, Americans are now among the top per capita meat consumers in the world, with the average American eating more than 3 times the global average. Meanwhile, production line-style slaughterhouses utilize gas chambers and electricity to kill more animals per day than ever before. Once you look at the industrialized reality of where 99% of meat in America comes from, it's easy to see there's nothing natural about modern meat. RFK's unrealistic promise to make the meat industry natural again. While Kennedy has raised a few important issues regarding industrial animal farming, including critiquing large-scale feedlots and corporate interests, his plans to make the meat industry natural again are dubious. Though he may be right about some of the problems, advocates and journalists have expressed concern that he is usually wrong about the solutions. While shifting towards small-scale organic and regenerative farming may sound like an improvement in some ways, scalability is a major issue in practice, but this reality is largely ignored in the MAHA space. Industrialized animal farming exists in order to feed current demands for meat, dairy, and eggs. Even just a switch to all grass-fed is likely unscalable at current rates of consumption. In order to produce the same quantity of beef as the present-day system, we find that a nationwide shift to exclusively grass-fed beef would require increasing the national cattle herd from 77 to 100 million cattle, an increase of 30%, environmental researchers Matthew Hayek and Rachel D. Garrett wrote in 2018. We also find that the current pastureland grass resource can support only 27% of the current beef supply. The world's population is also growing, expected to hit nearly 10 billion people by 2050. Over the past century or so, commercial agriculture has simply expanded operations in order to produce more food to keep up with population growth. But our natural resources, including land, are not unlimited, and the way we produce meat and dairy even now already comes at a steep environmental cost. In order to shift the U.S. to more natural, small-scale animal farming systems for the population at large, a substantial reduction in meat, dairy, and egg consumption would be required. And even then, a collaborative move to the carnivore diet is certainly not environmentally sustainable, given the amount of methane cows produce. But we have yet to hear Kennedy say that. What we have heard is that organic food is the answer, but unfortunately, organic farming is not better for climate pollution and has few, if any, proven health benefits. It would be extremely difficult and resource-intensive to scale. The bottom line, Levinovitz believes the MAHA movement is exploiting a real and important need for people to feel empowered and to feel like authority figures are giving them a say in their food system and in their medical system. As modern populations struggle with increasingly technocratic, top-down, epistemicallyopaque societies, a world where experts and political leaders make complex decisions without transparency and accessibility for the masses, we're going to see increasing emphasis on naturalness, both as a way of keeping us healthy and also as a way of feeling empowered. Unfortunately, the idea that meat today is natural or could be deindustrialized at our current rate of consumption is deeply misguided. You just listened to MAHA's Natural Foods Obsession Doesn't Account for the Way We Actually Eat, Part 2 by Jessica Scott-Reid at sentientmedia.org. And I'm your host, Marian Erickson. And I do want to point out what the author mentioned while talking about the unnatural living conditions in industrialized farming. She points out that today's animals are purposely bred and genetically manipulated to possess more profitable traits. So animals are bred to grow faster. They're pumped with antibiotics also so they grow faster and they don't get sick. And chickens are genetically manipulated to lay hundreds of eggs rather than a dozen or so. Dairy cows are manipulated to produce milk even while they're pregnant and to produce obscene amounts of milk so humans can take it. All of these things are completely unnatural and completely unhealthy for these animals. And even on the small backyard farms, these animals don't get to live a natural life because they're killed at a tiny fraction of their natural lifespan. And regarding the regenerative, small-scale, more natural farming, it is definitely not scalable, and it makes me think of a wonderful quote from Sailesh Rao in the documentary The End of Medicine, which I highly recommend. It talks about the antimicrobial resistance. I will link this in the show notes, or you can just Google The End of Medicine documentary. But he says, when we say we'll go back to small-scale farming, we're basically saying the problem is not that we're eating animal foods. The problem is that the riffraff are eating animal foods. If you can make the poor people stop eating animal foods, there'll be plenty for the rich to eat animal foods. It's a very classist, colonialist argument to make. I'm just shocked that anyone would make it in this day and age. Love, love, love that quote. And I'll link a couple of related episodes in the show notes, 959 and 960, how Big Meat worked to rebrand in 2024 using disinformation. 843, homesteading is a viral trend, but butchery gone awry is its dark side. 808 and 809, farmed bluefin tuna brands claim to be sustainable. Here's what really happens. 779, is climate-friendly beef always just greenwashing? And 351, processed is a useless, empty descriptor of food. There's a ton of other ones I've done, so if you want to use your search field and put in the words natural or processed or any of the interesting topics you heard in this article, please do so. And please share this episode with anyone who might benefit, and thanks for listening.